Hello world, it's Tuesday the 28th of January 2025 and we're looking at a forecast for soaring from Worcester tomorrow, Wednesday the 29th of January 2025. I actually meant to start on this slide because it's very pretty. As you can see, we've got a wave system developing tomorrow, and that opens up all kinds of interesting things in the forecast, so I'll go into a bit more detail than you've been using for the past few forecasts. That's the same system a bit higher up just to look pretty. But let's start with this vertical velocity cross section at 925 millibars. That's just about just over 3,000 feet. And we can see Worcester's over here, and our options for error towing tomorrow, we can release. The most obvious one is at Victoria Peak. All of our other release points are all looking a little soft, so Victoria Peak seems to be the choice. But if you release there, before you go anywhere, you're going to have to climb up and move out, and that ridge lift will be working there up to the top of the ridge and a bit higher, not on Victoria Peak itself, but in the Statanskloof Valley. There's a wave bar that will develop, so just a little bit southwest of Victoria Peak. So once you climb as high as you can on the peak itself, you head off southwest and you should pick up this wave bar. And that wave bar will take you up to the top of the controlled airspace, which is the legal limit is flight level 85, and normally from 8,000 feet it's best practice to move away lest your settings are a bit wrong, or you somehow intrude a little bit higher. If you 1 foot over that flight level 85, you will get scored as an outlanding at that point. You'll get no points for the rest of the day, and it's quite severe consequences. So be very careful you don't exceed the airspace limitations. But the wave system has no boundaries. It carries on up to flight level 700, and even above the 700 is about, I think, 12,000 feet or so. So another interesting picture. This is a cross section through the wave. It's actually taken along this line which goes right through Victoria Peak. And let me find my cross section again. Sorry, there it went. Where the black lines are closely spaced together in parallel, then the profile of the wind and temperature through the atmosphere is favorable for the formation of waves. And as you can see, this cross section shows that when this air mass hits a mountain, that we get these waves generated downstream. Now what it also indicates to us is that below about somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 feet, it's going to be very difficult to contact the wave. There are a few local areas where it comes down a bit further, but the main wave starts off, you can expect it to be maybe 4,000 feet, depending on which bar you're working with. That's at 10,000 feet, and this is at 5 o'clock, just to show you that this whole system is still going to carry on working throughout the afternoon. But once we have a wave day, we have strong winds on the ground, and we have other considerations, and that is, can we actually get can the tugs operate? Can we launch gliders? This is the surface wind at 11 o'clock. and here is Worcester. And the method I've used for forecasting wind speeds, specifically for tugging operations, is I take the area of the Breda River Valley around where we're operating, and the lowest wind speed will be typically your lowest gust speed, which is here is about 18 knots, and your highest will be the highest wind speed in the valley, not on the ridges but in the valley. And here we're getting up to about 26 or 28 knots at 11 o'clock. So what I expect is wind gusting between 18 and 28 knots at 11 o'clock tomorrow. You'll notice that you get these pretty little bars in the wind speed. That's associated with the wave pattern, the wave system above, and the way the model makes the equations balance is it says that the wind speed is faster in certain areas than it is depending on whether it's at the peak or the trough of the wave bar. Now in reality it doesn't behave so nicely like that. What you get is when that gets down to ground level, it breaks up into turbulence, and we get these rolling gusts of wind that come through the valley. But I use the highest speed and the lowest speed as an indication of what the gust speed will be. But you can check tomorrow and see how accurate my technique is. Other pilots are predicting higher wind speeds from other forecasts. Going out to 2 o'clock, we have wind between 20 and about 26 knots, slightly lower. And by 5 o'clock, it gets down to maybe 16 knots and up to 24 knots. What this is also showing us is that there isn't a huge increase in wind speed through the day. Normally on wave days we find that if we can launch very early, you can get gliders launched before the wind picks up, and later in the afternoon the tugs get put away in the hangars because the wind's blowing too strongly. Hopefully tomorrow what we get at 11 o'clock will be as strong as we see for the rest of the day. Just looking at some soundings. At 11 o'clock you can see there's this wind shear between ground and basically 1,000 feet. It's more pronounced at 2 o'clock, although the wind is actually slightly lighter on this forecast. You can see it's a strong northwesterly wind, and most of the time it's blowing about 30 knots, with the wind shear down to 20 knots on short finals. It obviously implies a lot of turbulence. At 5 o'clock the same thing, although the wind shear is even greater. It's over a slightly bigger height. Now what do you do once you're airborne and you got climbed away from Vic Peak? Where do you go? And well, that's up to the task setters, but there are lots of options. The first one is this wind is blowing onto these front ridges all the way from Claver over here down to Gordon's Bay, and for those people who like flying over the sea, it even goes a bit further, although I don't think that's appropriate for a competition task. So lots of options over there, and the alternate is to set a wave task, and let's look at 850 millibars, which is below the TMA at 2 o'clock, and you can see we've got wave bars. This one is just downwind of, and that's this Detains Kloof one, but there's another one forming downwind of Vic Peak, and then down past Villiers-Dorp and out to sea. There's quite a lot of controlled airspace and tricky things to avoid, and to do it and stay below the airspace without falling out the bottom of the wave is a bit tricky, but that's another option. There's also a wave up here in the Hex River Valley and some at the corner of Tulbach, which will be outside of the TMA. You can go up to, I think, at 12.5 or 13,000 feet or so. So wave options are another option for tasks tomorrow. Let's move on a little bit. I'm just looking at the surface wind at 5 o'clock, just to show that it's still blowing. Maybe it's calmed down a little bit more. It's only 15 knots onto the front ridge now, but that's enough to warm things up. That's a very strong day, and big distances are possible in conditions like that. To look quickly, this is the ridge lift, just to show it obviously picks out all the waves, but it also picks out what's happening on the Witzenberg and the front ridge, which is as we expect. Quite special. And still working. That one was 5 o'clock, sorry, this one is at 2 o'clock, but still working throughout the whole day. I'll leave it there. We have lots of charts to look at. It's going to be an interesting day tomorrow. I think be ready for an early start, because whatever happens, it gives the contest director some flexibility to set the most interesting task that can be flown in these conditions. Be careful, fly safely, and whatever you do, don't bust the airspace, because that will give you an instant outlanding on the first offence, and worse if we have a repeat opportunity of this weather in the week still. I'll talk to you again tomorrow. Thanks. Good night.